Good morning. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Consortium's 24th annual conference. We thought last year that in 2022, we would be munching on bagels and sipping coffee in person. But here we are again on Zoom. Still, I know that this will be a very rewarding and informative event. So thank you all for being here. First of all, I want to acknowledge this year more than any other, the incredibly important work that all of you do day in and day out. This has not been an easy year. You've been expected to serve as public health workers, technology experts, book deliverers, mask monitors, test proctors, and oh yes, teachers and school leaders. So be sure to raise a glass or a coffee cup to yourselves. You should know that your consortium work has been recognized, most recently this past week by the Washington Post. As their headline put it, shockingly good news about New York City public high schools. And columnist Jay Matthews wished that, quote, more districts in other parts of the country would give such a schools a try. I also want to especially give a shout out to all the school liaisons and the workshop leaders for making this collaborative effort possible, along with the consortium staff, Phyllis Toshlik, Jonathan Katz, and most especially today, our consortium coordinator, Alexandra Rothman-Noonan, AJ, as she's known to us, who is responsible for the technical wizardry, which has more than 850 of you attending the plenary and participating in more than 40 workshops led by and for teachers. Now I want to welcome Carolyn Quintana, the DOE's newly appointed Deputy Chancellor for Teaching and Learning Opportunities. Many of us were fortunate to know Q from her leadership role as Executive Director for the Citywide Affinity Office and as the highly respected principal of Bronxdale High School. Q.
Thanks, Anne. Sorry, taking a second there to unmute. Thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here. And like you, I wish that we were in person, but virtual will need to do for now. Super excited to be part of this annual conference and super excited to be here alongside all of these really great people to have an opportunity to talk about how we think about teaching and learning, and most importantly, to learn alongside all of these folks. I've always been an advocate for schools that are rooted in inquiry, and I've had the luxury of working directly with so many of the great folks leading today's annual conference. I don't know that I would see such beauty in math if I had not really met Jonathan Katz and Nate Dilworth early on in my career. I'm especially excited to be here with this new administration because I'm working alongside a chancellor who sees great value in authentic work that pushes our intellect and expands our framework of what learning is and how it's done. And he believes that this kind of work is an essential element to build and sustain our democracy. You've probably heard him talk a lot about how kids are not involved enough in our democracy or in our communities. And I think that you'll disagree that the kids in your schools most certainly do play a role and have a voice. I'm happy to be here with all of you today, especially given the challenging year that Anne just mentioned you've had, to also celebrate the work that you've done and to learn with you about how we can continue to redefine what the system perceives as success. I'm hopeful that I'll learn a great deal about how you've built belonging, about the connections that you've made between curriculum, instruction, and real joy in learning, and about how we can think about defining students' learning and growing through means that are outside of the high stakes testing. I'm excited to be part of this work with you today and excited to hear more about how you're preparing students for the world beyond high school and to learn a little bit more about what it means to lead schools during these times. So thank you, Anne and folks, for having me here. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Q, and for joining us today. I think we'll enjoy working with you as months go on. And I'd like to now acknowledge a few guests: Regent Fran Wills, Allison Amergarb, and Nicole Lennon from the State Education Department, Mia Perez from City Council member Hanif's office in Brooklyn, Joanna Miller Director of the Education Policy Center of the New York Civil Liberties Union, Dr. Michelle Fine from the CUNY Graduate Center and Principal Investigator of the CUNY Consortium Research Study, and Superintendent Alan Chang and his team. And I'd finally want to acknowledge and welcome the faculty and administrators from our schools in Ithaca and Rochester. Welcome. And now to the program and our two exciting guest speakers. It is my great honor to introduce Congressman Jamaal Bowman, who represents New York's 16th Congressional District, which includes the Bronx and parts of Westchester. To follow Jamaal's activities is to be engaged in issues of central importance in today's political climate. Just in the last week, Jamaal co-sponsored a bill with Massachusetts Senator Markey to control energy costs through heating and cooling relief legislation. He urged WNYC listeners when he appeared on the Brian Lehrer Show to support the fair pay for home care workers in the New York governor's budget. And he sponsored a town hall featuring teenagers from the Bronx and Westchester on COVID education and mental health, which State Senator Shelley Mayer, who's chair of the Senate's Education Committee, aptly described as both moving and eye-opening. Finally, acting on behalf of all of us last week, Jamaal joined in the tradition of nonviolent action to protest the defeat of the John Lewis voting rights bill. As a middle school principal for 10 years, and now as co-chair of the House of Representatives Education Committee, Jamaal has brought an experienced and critical voice to the national debate on educational assessment and accountability, and has worked diligently to find ways to drastically reduce the role of standardized testing in our nation's K-12 schools. Jamaal had planned to join us from DC on Zoom, but kindly he sent a message when an emergency arose quickly. And so he's recorded a message for us. He's a longtime ally of the consortium, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the sole male member of the squad, Congressman Jamaal Bowman, who will say a few words and welcome our keynoter, Dr. Denisha Jones.
Peace and love, everyone. It's Congressman Bowman here. It's an honor to join you all virtually today and extend my greetings to the New York Performance Standards Consortium Annual Conference. I've been inspired by you all for my entire career. I spent 20 years in education before coming to Congress. I know who you are. I love your work. Your work should be a model of what happens across this country. Love the theme for this year's conference, Unstandardized, nurturing the joy of learning. We do not have a country, we do not have a democracy, we do not have a society, we do not have an equitable economy designed to solve the world's problems if we do not nurture the joy of learning in our kids. As a middle school principal, I saw the harmful effects of annual standardized testing. The emphasis on standardized testing continues to limit what is taught in our schools, and not just what is taught, but how it is taught, with so much pressure to teach to the test. We need to ensure teaching and learning is aligned to research and best practices. With annual standardized testing, it is not. We need to also make sure our teaching and learning is aligned to the passion and brilliance of our students and the challenges of a 21st century society. We need to also bring curiosity, inspiration, creativity, and cooperation into our classrooms so that students reach the highest levels of thinking. This unlocks their unlimited potential and affirms their self-determination. Prior to my time in Congress, I was one of the leading voices in the opt-out movement, as many of you know. Through our work together, the New York opt-out movement showed us what is possible when we are committed to our children fulfilling their dreams, not filling out bubbles on the multiple choice standardized tests. Last year, one of the first things I did when I got to Congress was lead a letter to Secretary Cardona and President Biden asking them to waive annual standardized testing requirements for schools in light of the pandemic. I appreciate the work that you, consortium educators have done to create a model, not just for New York, but for the nation of what is possible behind standardized testing mandates. It's unfortunate to learn that lately, the New York City Department of Ed mandated even more standardized tests during the pandemic. It shows you clearly that our education leaders are not clearly focused on what needs to happen in our schools. The test chosen for high school students, the MAP growth, is the very same instrument that led Jesse Hagopian, one of my heroes, to organize a test boycott across Seattle in 2014. I am hopeful the new Chancellor David Banks, will be afforded the autonomy to focus on genuine teaching, learning, and assessment, but it's going to be on all of you and all of us to push him and new Mayor Eric Adams to do so. I will now turn it over to Dr. Denisha Jones, another one of my heroes, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for many, many years. Dr. Jones is the director of the Sarah Lawrence College of Art and Teaching graduate program and has long been an advocate for our youngest children and for their opportunity to receive an excellent and equitable education based not on arbitrary standards, but instead on how children actually develop. In addition to her leadership at Sarah Lawrence, Dr. Jones is the co-director of Defending the Early Years and the leader in the Black Lives Matter at School initiative, a coalition of educators organizing for racial justice in education. As part of this, she and colleague Jesse Hagopian are co-editors of a new book, Black Lives Matter at School. During the 2020 presidential campaign, Dr. Jones' question to then candidate Joe Biden went viral. She asked, "If you are elected president, will you commit to ending the use of standardized testing in public schools?" Biden responded, "I think it's a big mistake to move in a direction where it's all about evaluating a teacher or student based on testing. Teaching to a test underestimates and discounts the things that are most important for students to know. It is on us to continue to hold President Biden accountable for that response." The idea embedded in his statement is what we are fighting for today. And with that, I will now turn it over to the amazing, incomparable, brilliant, relentless, compassionate, loving Dr. Jones. Peace and love, everyone. Be well. Let's continue the fight that we have to continue together.
Wow, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to follow that, but I want to begin by thanking Congressman Bowman for that awesome introduction. It has been an honor to know Jamaal since when he was a principal and really pushing for education justice and to want to expand the consortium so his school and other schools could be a part of it, and to see him now as a congressman representing the people and bringing the fight to the Capitol and to our government. So thank you so much. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen here. I have a couple of slides just to keep me on track when I'm talking. And all right, there we go. So hopefully everyone can see that. Let me put this in, there we go. All right. I also want to thank Ann Cook and Phyllis Tashlick for inviting me to give today's keynote. Given all the time I have uplifted the New York Performance Standards Consortium as a model for what worthwhile authentic assessments could be, it really is an honor to give today's keynote. And now that I live in New York and work near the city, I'm even more passionate about making access to the performance-based assessments the norm, or at least a viable option for all children. But in order to do that, we need to center education as the practice of freedom. Bell Hooks theorized about education as the practice of freedom in her book, Teaching to Transgress. She believed that the classroom remained the most radical space of possibility. She urged us to open our minds and our hearts so that we can think and rethink, so that we can create new visions, so that we can celebrate teaching that enables transgressions of movement against and beyond boundaries. It is that movement which makes education the practice of freedom. As we continue to move in this space and resist the boundaries that constrict the freedom that we believe is important in education, we must think about how we can engage in the practice of freedom. What does it look like to free children to learn and to free teachers to teach? And how that freedom to teach and freedom to learn will lead to authentic, worthwhile assessments. But before that freedom can be achieved, we must reckon with our history and the history of public education. Before we can make education the practice of freedom, we must understand that education was designed to maintain the status quo. Who were schools designed to serve? We know they weren't designed to serve the majority of children who are in them now, which are children of color, children of immigrants, children of low-income parents, children with disabilities. None of those children were in mind when we designed our school system. So what does that tell us about the education system that we currently have? That it was originally conceived as a tool for white men to prosper and to continue, for white rich landowning men to prosper and to continue to prosper and to rule over this country. And over time, through resistance and struggle, schools begrudgingly became more accessible to other people. First to white women, then to immigrants, white immigrants from around the country, as a way to keep them out of the streets and out of the workforce and in schools, and eventually into a place where all students are required by law to attend unless their parents take them out for homeschooling. And although most schools and states now have these wonderful statements about how their mission and vision is to support all children, we've never quite addressed or reckoned with the history of how schools were designed and what that initial decision means for schools today. It means that a lot of the practices that we take as natural in education and teaching and learning come from a very colonial perspective that was designed to serve an elite population and not the most of the students we see today. So we must ask ourselves, how do current practices maintain inequality? How do we address the roots of inequality if we refuse to acknowledge them, or worse, label them divisive concepts? It is almost unreal to be giving this talk today, which is the first day of the National Black Lives Matter at School 2022 Week of Action, in the middle of continued state legislation mandates and local school districts banning books and banning the teaching truth as labeling it divisive concepts. We've made so much progress in the era of educational justice and the uprisings we saw since Ferguson and in 2020. And now we're feeling the white rage or the black lash as some conservative lawmakers attempt to undergrad that progress and take us back to a place where students are not learning the truth about this country and they're unable to reckon with the history of this country. Education as the practice of freedom requires acknowledging and accepting our history so that we can liberate our minds and liberate our society. We don't need we don't need to ban books. We don't need to ban ideas. We need to encourage diverse perspectives, to engage with counter storytelling and counter narratives, to really expand the full history of this country and to understand what needs to be done in an effort to bring freedom to our schools. So I remember coming across this quote, and it took me, I had to post on Facebook for someone to finally find it because I couldn't remember. It was Carl Sagan, right? And it really struck me, and as I was preparing for my remarks today, I wanted to include it, right? So he says, you go talk to kindergartners or first grade kids, you find a class full of science enthusiasts, and they ask deep questions. They ask, what is a dream? Why do we have toes? Why is the moon round? What is the birthday of the world? Why is the grass green? These are profound, important questions. They just bubble right out of them. You go talk to 12th graders and there's none of that. They've become incurious. Something terrible has happened between kindergarten and 12th grade. And I think we can all agree that we are fighting to stop something terrible from happening from kindergarten to 12th grade. So what do you think happens in K through 12 that causes children to lose their natural curiosity? I find it very interesting because I feel like K through 12 is in the space where freedom can begin in early childhood and freedom can come back depending on the type of college you go to, but it's almost non-existent in the K through 12 area, right? If you're fortunate to begin life with a hands-on engaging early childhood experience that nurtures exploration and discovery, then you begin your education in the practice of freedom. And if you're fortunate to go to a university that really encourages you with those same experiences, right? Hands-on exploration, collaboration, discovery, right? then you're able to get back to that place of freedom. Not all colleges, right? Some, mine, right? I'm very proud of what we do at Sarah Lawrence, right? But you have more freedom in college, right? You have more freedom to learn and engage and to ask those deep questions and to learn how to answer them with, right? Based on knowledge from other theorists, right? And what you're learning along the way. But in the middle, most people don't get to see that freedom sustained, right? And if you don't get that freedom in ECE, in early childhood education, and then you don't get in K through 12, are you likely to even go to college, right? To get that as well. So there is a break in the path of freedom. And I see early childhood environments that are more and more centered on freedom, right? Whether they're loose parts, exploration, places for discovery, play programs, where kids have the freedom to explore. And I see that in some of the different options for colleges as they move into test optional or not requiring tests, is they change the curriculum to make it more relevant to the students' lives and more meaningful. But what happens? What is wrong with K through 12 that we are unable to bring in the practice of freedom? And so often we go from this, the early childhood places that I just mentioned, to this, right? To this idea that kids hate school and that's okay, they're supposed to this idea of kindergarten as the first grade, right? And kids are miserable, young kids, and teachers taking on more and more and more of the outside responsibilities that impede their ability to teach and to build relationships with children. On the left, the images are from my time in Anji, China, where Ms. Chung and her team of educators have really revolutionized early childhood education with her approach called Anji Play. It's gotten so much interest from the people in China that they are now, they announced that it's going to become the national model for early childhood across the country. Right now, Anji is a province about 3 hours outside of Shanghai. But there, the children in their public kindergartens who are age 3 to 6 get to engage in the freedom to play and the freedom to learn. And so you see joy, which is one of their 5 principles, right? You see engagement. You see teachers really having the time to talk with children and get into what they're doing, not just scaffold and teach and give instruction, but to be a co-learner with them and to engage in the process with them. And so that is what we should have in all early childhood programs. And we do in a lot, not just in China. As I mentioned, there are my colleagues across the country, Keisha Reed and others are doing this in early childhood spaces across the country, and they're trying to do it more and more. But they're often limited, right? They're only allowed to do it if they're a private-based preschool, not in a Head Start environment, not in a publicly funded kindergarten environment. And then it gets to our K through 12 system where it's not happening at all. So how do we go from this to this? And what can we do to really stop it? First, we need to really focus on what does it mean for the freedom to learn? And so these are just some of the characteristics that I saw in the children in Anji and other children that I observed in Duluth, Minnesota, who were engaging in this free play, also in Madison, Wisconsin, right? We all know that children are driven by innate curiosity. They're born with it. And it's all they want to do is make sense of the world around them. And when they're free to learn, that's what we see children naturally do. They are driven by their innate curiosity. They engage in this self-directed learning through the constant questioning that they always want to know, right? There's not enough answers to the questions that they have. And that guides their engagement in the work that they do in these spaces, right? Because it's their questioning that leads them to the next thing and to the next thing and to the next thing. In these spaces, the freedom to learn means that the children have time to tinker, time to build, time to experiment, and time to wonder, right? They're not forced into doing things that adults think they should, that they are not ready for, that they don't have any interest in, right? Yeah, they come together in whole groups, but then they have unopened exploration time, indoor and outdoor, where they can choose what they want to do. And that's when you see them driven by that curiosity and you see them engaged in that self-directed learning. And all of this leads to this sustained persistence. That was one of the most shocking things that I think I saw in China and other times where I visit these play spaces, is that the children are sustained and they're persisting in the work that they're doing because they're fully engaged and they're fully motivated in what they're doing and want to be at the task. Another thing that's important in the freedom to learn is that they're trusted as risk takers. One of the 5 principles of the Anji play philosophy is risk. Children have to be allowed to take risks. We have to trust that children can assess the risk of a situation. But we can't do that if we don't allow them to take risk. And so in the spaces where we're free to learn, children are trusted to make those decisions and to be risk takers. And they're collaborators. Often, sometimes they don't want to collaborate, sometimes they want to work alone, and that's okay too. But often this freedom to learn leads to children being collaborators with each other and with the adults in the environment. And that is also something that we don't see a lot in schools, right? We try and partner group work, but not this true, authentic collaboration that comes from, we want to work together on something that matters to us and that's important to us. So again, as an early childhood expert, I see these in the best practices of early childhood education, but I often don't see them in our K through 12, right? And so the freedom to learn can begin in a high quality early childhood place that values these approaches, but then it's often lost when we get to a K through 12 environment. But in addition to creating the freedom to learn for young children, we also have to think about how it leads to the freedom to teach. And this was another powerful observation that came through in the presentations at the True Play Conference in Anji, and my observations of teachers who allow children the freedom to learn through play, right? So one of the things I noticed is that the teachers and the students go from this place of surviving to thriving, right? And so if you're familiar with Dr. Bettina Love, in her book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, she talks about the educational survival complex. And she talks about how Black children and poor children and other marginalized children are just taught to survive that. And I believe that their teachers are also taught to survive that educational complex. And neither the teacher or the child is thriving if all you're doing is surviving. But when children are free to learn and teachers are free to teach, teachers move from surviving to thriving. They are in an environment where they are just engaged with the process of teaching and learning so much that they're not held down by the responsibilities of just trying to meet this curriculum objective or raise this test score, right? They're in a new position where they can thrive and they can also support children in thriving. When children are free to learn and teachers are free to teach, they can engage in really powerful observations. This is another cornerstone of the Art of Teaching program at Sarah Lawrence College. We use the descriptive review process out of the Vermont Prospect School. And we spend a lot of time with our students, helping them to understand the power of observing children to get to know them deeply. Not the surface 10-minute observation here, right? But the sustained, long, engaging observation that you can really only do in college, right? Because you're just in that environment for 2 days a week and you're not the teacher in charge, right? But it shows you how to really get to know children deeply and understand who they are as a person, as a human, as a learner, as a thinker, as a doer. And that freedom allows you to then move into building these nurturing relationships with that child, right? I've noticed that teachers who work with children in this place of freedom, they are shed their deficit notions of what children should not be, cannot do and should not do. Instead, they are able to see the child fully human and build these positive, lasting relationships that support the thriving of both the child and the teacher. And the freedom to teach means you have time to actually support learning experiences for children. You're not rushing to get to this next part and this next part of the curriculum. You can really think about and reflect on what the children are doing and talking to you about and plan activities or questions or different things to support that learning the next day, to extend that learning in ways that make sense to children. Right. And so that time we know is missing in most K through 12 environments that are focused on standardized education and standardized testing. There's just not enough time to make learning meaningful when you are under the gun to meet all of these standards and to prepare students to memorize information that they won't remember in time to take that exam. Right. And then additionally, the freedom to teach leads to a relevant, engaging curriculum. there's no need to teach things that you don't even understand yourself or don't see the importance of, right? If you are encouraging children to be free to learn, right? You can now focus on the things that matter and make those deep, skillful curriculum connections that teachers want to do, but often struggle because there's so much content to cover. And so this freedom extends both ways, right? The freedom to learn will lead to better teaching, right? And in addition to those nurturing relationships, teachers and children in these environments become partners in unleashing each other's potential. And I think that's also very powerful. There are some teachers who come to the Anji work and they're new and they don't get it. And it takes them a long time of being in relationship with the children in the environment to kind of shift their minds about what it means to be a teacher and unleash their potential. And at the same time, supporting the children who are already ready to unleash their potential. They just need adults to get out of their way. And so it becomes this very beautiful synchronous environment where children are thriving, teachers are thriving, and the freedom is guiding the work that we do, not imposed mandates by people who think this is what teaching and learning should look like. And all of this leads to the natural outcome of authentic, worthwhile assessments. I've been, advocating against standardized testing for a long time. And I remember one time we did these opt-out in front of the Department of Education, these kind of, events out there. And I remember someone, walking by and saying, what, your teachers who don't believe in teaching and testing? How is that possible? And I remember saying, assessment is a part of the teaching and learning cycle, right? I can't teach and help my students to learn if I don't assess, right, at different points. But as we know, standardized testing is only one form of assessment, and it's not authentic and it's not worthwhile. And what I'm seeing in my role at Sarah Lawrence, in the way that we see assessments, and in the early childhood spaces where students are free to learn and teachers are free to teach, that you can bridge that and create authentic, worthwhile assessments. But first, we have to shift our minds, right, and our society views from knowledge competition to knowledge documentation. So what is knowledge competition, right? It's this idea that knowledge is finite and kids must spend their time in K through 12 competing with each other to see who has the most knowledge, right? It's almost, I always see assessment in that way as like a gotcha game. Like I'm trying to prove that you don't know something. Oh, gotcha, you don't know that, right? And I'm going to penalize your teachers and your school and your community because you don't know these things that we think you should know. And that is just not the purpose of education. That is not education as the practice of freedom, right? But knowledge documentation is a worthwhile goal. If we imagine that our role as teachers was to document what our students know and can do, not in a form of competition, not in a form of making these judgments and evaluations, but to just document, what do our students know? What can they do? And better yet, we let our students document that knowledge because they are the ones best in position to tell us what they know and what they can do and what they have learned. Authentic, worthwhile assessments measure what really matters. And a lot of what we see in standardized testing does not, right? In an information age, does it really matter how many facts you memorize when you can get information at your fingertips? Yes, there are some skills that I'm glad I have, like how to type really fast. I've memorized my multiplication tables. I'm really good at my word families, which is helping me a lot in Wordle, right? Those things are helpful. But there are so many things that I spent years studying and learning, and it doesn't really matter right now because the skills I need is how to search for information, evaluate that information, discern fact from opinion, and make my own judgments about the information being presented to me from multiple sources. And that's the kind of skills that we're going to need our children to be able to do in the world of fake news and people banning knowledge as divisive concepts, right? One of the things that I love about our conference system at Sarah Lawrence, where our students spend time each semester working on a project that they're interested in and working one-on-one with the faculty member or in small groups with other students to produce what I see as learner-driven assessments. So last semester I had 9 students doing conference projects, and I'm telling you, I learned so much from them that I learned then I wasn't teaching them this information, right? They were the experts. They taught me about all of these amazing topics they were interested in. And we met every other week and we planned out what they were doing. And some of them, were traditional type lit reviews. I got plays and scripts to really document the knowledge that they were seeing. Some did interviews with other people and kind of, from a personal interview to interviews of family and friends to make the connections that they found in the literature. It's just been really amazing to see the power of a learner-driven assessment. And that's a lot about, I believe, what the consortium is doing and what you're trying to do with these performance assessments. It should be driven by the learner. And then there's the idea that learning through multiple perspectives, right? Standardized testing, again, is just one way of looking at knowledge, but it shouldn't be the only one. It's so important that we have multiple ways to document what we know, what we've learned, what we're thinking about, how we're trying to make sense of different things. So throughout the semester, my students can, they have to respond to these essential questions. And I'm like, you can respond creatively. You can write a poem. You can write a script. You can make a video or an audio recording or interpretive dance, right? There are multiple perspectives. And it really supports this idea that we are more than just future teachers, right? You can be a astronomer, astrology person, or a biologist, right? And a dancer. You can be a chemist and a musician. You can be a painter and a psychologist, right? We want our students to engage through multiple perspectives. And that's the type of authentic, worthwhile assessments that welcome these types of perspectives and showcase the different knowledge that students have. And so I want to end with this quote from Paulo Freire. Again, thinking about education and what it's meant to be, what it can be and what it is, right? And so he says, education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. And so now more than ever, I see this is so important. As I mentioned, today is the first day of the Black Lives Matter at School National Week of Action. This is our 6th National Week of Action. Will begun as a one-day event in Seattle in 2016, has launched into a national movement where educators from across the country are moving in those boundaries and searching for that, bring that freedom into their practice, the freedom to support their children and students and to declare that Black lives do matter in our schools. We have amazing 13 guiding principles that really guide this work. And so I invite you to visit our website at www.blacklivesmatteratschool.com and check out our resources and the events to learn more. But I hope that as you move forward today into these many workshops and continue in the work that you do, that you find ways to center freedom in your practice, in your pedagogy, and your theory about why we are all doing this most important work. Thank you.
Denisha, thank you so much. That was an absolutely inspirational and provocative comments. And so much of it touched on things that are of concern to our schools and our teachers and our principals in the consortium. Multiple perspectives, the whole idea of freedom to learn and freedom to teach. This is one of the these are really important thoughts and ideas. And now I would like to invite you to join the workshops that Denisha spoke about. Some of them may be recorded. If you need information about the link to your session, please check your email first and then reach out to your liaison or to your school principal. And we hope you enjoy the workshops. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Denisha. Thank you, Jamaal Bowman. We look forward to seeing you all at our 25th conference, which we hope will be in person. Have a good experience in your workshop, and thank you.